A billionaire stood in the rain outside a woman's door. His coat was soaked through. Water dripped from his hair and ran down the ridges of the scars that covered the right side of his face. His hands were trembling, not from the cold, from something far worse, from the terror of what he was about to say. He knocked, and when she opened that door, paint still smeared across her forearms, surprise and hurt flickering behind her eyes, he said the words that had been clawing at his chest for 3 weeks. I have spent my entire adult life believing that anyone who gets close to me will eventually see what everyone else sees. Something broken, something to endure rather than love. And you looked at me like I was whole, and that terrified me, because if I let myself believe it and then lost you, I would not survive it. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been so afraid of losing someone that you pushed them away first? Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered if anyone could ever truly love the person staring back? Have you ever built walls so high around your heart that even you forgot what was behind them? Because that is exactly what this man did. A billionaire, a titan of industry, a man whose name could move markets and reshape skylines. And yet he could not do the one thing that mattered most. He could not let himself be loved. The world called him the Phantom. The media made him a spectacle. Women came for his money and left when they realized that being with him meant being seen with him. And the loneliness, oh, the loneliness ate him alive. But then one woman walked into his world. She did not see his scars. She did not see his fortune. She saw him. And what happened next will change the way you think about love forever. But before we dive into this story, if you believe that love should see beyond the surface, go ahead and hit that like button right now. And if you are new here, welcome to Mr. Andy Love Stories. We tell the kind of stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Now settle in, because this one is going to take you on a journey. Let us start at the beginning. Victor Ashford had learned to read a room before he ever stepped inside it. It was a survival skill, one he had developed over decades of watching people rearrange their faces the moment they saw him. He knew the choreography by heart, the subtle tightening around the eyes, the involuntary glance downward, the quick recovery that always came a beat too late. And then the overcompensating smile, the one that never quite reached the corners of their mouths. He had been watching this dance since he was 19 years old, and by 44, he had stopped expecting anything different. At 44, Victor Ashford was worth more than most small nations. His telecommunications empire, Ashford Global, spanned 4 continents. He owned satellites orbiting the Earth, fiber optic networks threading beneath oceans, data centers buried inside mountains in 3 different countries. His signature on a single contract could reshape the digital infrastructure of an entire nation overnight. Forbes had featured him on their cover 3 times. The first 2 times, they airbrushed the scars without asking. He asked them not to the 3rd time. They did it anyway. And that single act told you everything you needed to know about the world Victor Ashford inhabited. A world that wanted his brilliance, his money, his power, but could not bring itself to look at his face without flinching. The scars. Let me tell you about the scars. Because they are not what you might imagine. When people hear the word scar, they think of something singular, a line, a mark, something contained. What Victor carried was a constellation. The scars covered the entire right side of his face, starting at his forehead and cascading down across his cheek, his jaw, his ear, his neck. They trailed beneath his collar where they spread across his shoulder and upper chest like the cracked surface of dried earth. The skin was textured and uneven, pulled tight in some places and rippled in others, a permanent map of a night that had nearly killed him. He was 19, home from his first year at university for winter break. It was supposed to be a quiet visit. His parents' house in a leafy suburb outside Philadelphia. His younger sister, Marin, had just turned 16. They had celebrated with cake and too much laughter and his mother's famous roast that never quite turned out the way she intended, but tasted like love anyway. It was 2 a.m. when he smelled the smoke, a faulty gas line in the kitchen. The investigators would determine that later. In the moment, all Victor knew was that the hallway was filling with black smoke and his sister's bedroom was on the other side of the house. He got to her first, shook her awake, pushed her toward the window. She was screaming, confused, half asleep. He lifted her out onto the porch roof and told her to jump. She did. Their parents had already made it out through the back door. Victor turned to follow Marin through the window, and that is when the ceiling collapsed. He does not remember the flames themselves. The doctors told him later that the human brain has a way of protecting itself from certain kinds of pain, filing them away in sealed compartments that can only be accessed in nightmares. What he remembers is the sound, the roar of it, like a living thing breathing in the walls around him. The firefighters pulled him out 11 minutes later. 11 minutes. That is all it took to change the entire trajectory of a human life. He spent 4 months in a burn unit. Skin grafts, infections, surgeries that blurred into one long corridor of fluorescent lights and morphine haze. When they finally let him see a mirror, he did not recognize the face looking back at him. Before the fire, Victor had been handsome, not in a flashy magazine cover way, but in the quiet, steady way that made people want to be near him. Warm brown eyes, a quick smile that put strangers at ease, the kind of face that suggested trustworthiness before he had even spoken a word. After the fire, all of that was gone. And here is what people do not understand about disfigurement. It is not the scars themselves that destroy you. It is the way the world reacts to them. It is the moment you walk into a coffee shop and watch the barista's expression shift before she catches herself. It is the way children stare with open curiosity, and their parents pull them away, as though scarred skin might be contagious. It is the dates who say all the right things over text and then go pale when they see you in person. It is the 1,000 tiny paper cuts of being looked at and looked away from, day after day, year after year, until you start to believe that the revulsion in their eyes is the truth and the person you used to be was the lie. Victor's sister Maren never treated him differently. Not once. She visited him every day in the hospital. She held his hand through the surgeries. And every year on the anniversary of the fire, she sent him white lilies. She never wrote a card. She never explained. She did not need to. The flowers said everything. I am alive because of you. I will never forget. But the rest of the world was not Maren. Victor returned to university with bandages still on his neck. His roommate requested a transfer within 2 weeks. Not because Victor was difficult to live with, but because, as the roommate confided to a mutual friend, it was hard to sleep in the same room as someone who looked like that. That was the first wound the world gave him after the fire. It was far from the last. He threw himself into his studies, then into business, then into building something so massive and impressive that people would have to look at his accomplishments instead of his face. And it worked, to a point. Ashford Global became one of the most powerful telecommunications companies on the planet. Victor became one of the wealthiest men in America. His name was spoken in boardrooms and summit meetings, and the hushed back channels where real power changed hands. But money has a strange gravity. It pulls people into your orbit whether you want them there or not. And the people it attracts are not always the ones you need. Women came. Of course they did. Victor was worth billions. He was powerful. He was single. And in certain circles, those 3 facts outweighed any number of scars. The first serious relationship after the fire was with a woman named Celeste. She was elegant, articulate, a gallery owner who moved in the right circles. She told him his scars made him interesting. She said they gave him character. She said she did not even notice them anymore. 6 months in, they were at a benefit dinner. A photographer approached the table and asked for a photo. Celeste turned her head so she was on Victor's left side, the unscarred side. She did this casually, as though it were an afterthought. But Victor noticed. He always noticed. 3 months later she left. The reason she gave was that they wanted different things. The real reason, he discovered through a mutual acquaintance, was that she was tired of the stares. Tired of being the woman next to the man with the ruined face. It was affecting her business, she said. Her image. Her brand. Her brand. The second relationship was with a financial analyst named Tessa. Brilliant, driven, attractive. She seemed different. She held his hand in public. She kissed his scarred cheek without hesitation. She told him she loved him. He believed her. 18 months into the relationship, Tessa sold a tell-all interview to a tabloid magazine. The article was 12 pages long. It described what it was like to be intimate with Victor in graphic, humiliating detail. The texture of his skin, the way he flinched when she touched certain areas, the sounds he made in his sleep when the nightmares came. She had turned his most private vulnerabilities into entertainment. The article was titled "Sleeping with the Monster." It trended on social media for 4 days. Victor read it once. He sat in his office in complete silence for 2 hours after. He did not cry. He did not throw anything. He did not call her. He simply sat there as something inside him, Some last remaining ember of belief in human goodness went dark. After Tessa, he stopped trying. Not dramatically, not with any grand declaration. He simply closed the door and turned the lock and walked away from the idea that anyone would ever love him for who he was rather than what he could provide. He filled his penthouse with art he admired but could not feel. He attended events his publicist deemed necessary, always arriving late, always leaving early, always wearing the same expression. Controlled, distant, unreachable. The press gave him a new nickname, the Phantom, a ghost who moved through the world of the elite without ever truly inhabiting it. His penthouse occupied the top floor of one of his own buildings, 72 stories above Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling windows on every side, views that real estate agents would call breathtaking. But the place was sterile, silent, the kind of space that echoed when you walked through it. No photographs on the walls, no personal touches, nothing that suggested a living, breathing human being came home to this place every night. Because Victor did not come home. He returned. There is a difference. He told himself he preferred it this way. Solitude was not loneliness, he reasoned. It was efficiency. It was protection. It was the logical response to a world that had shown him, again and again, that vulnerability was just another word for target. He told himself this every night. And every night, the silence in that penthouse pressed against him like a weight he could not name. This was Victor Ashford at 44 years old, billionaire, titan, phantom, a man who had everything the world said should make you happy and absolutely nothing that actually did. Now hold on to that image. A man worth billions, sitting alone in a penthouse 72 floors above a city that has never once felt like home. His reflection staring back at him from the dark glass. The scars visible, even in shadow. The silence, so thick, you could drown in it. Remember that. Because what happens next is going to change everything. The evening that changed Victor Ashford's life was not dramatic in its setup. There was no thunderclap, no cosmic announcement, just a Tuesday in October and a charity event he did not want to attend. The Global Literacy Initiative was holding its annual fundraiser in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The space had been dressed up with the kind of effortful casualness that costs a fortune to achieve. Exposed brick walls washed in warm amber light. Hanging Edison bulbs strung between reclaimed wood beams, long communal tables covered in linen and scattered with wildflowers, a jazz trio in the corner playing something soft and unobtrusive. Victor was a major donor, had been for years. The literacy programs aligned with his belief that access to education was the single most powerful lever for change in any society. He funded the programs generously. He did not particularly enjoy attending the events. But his publicist Diane had made the case clearly. You have not been seen at a public function in 7 weeks, Victor. People are starting to talk. The phantom narrative is getting out of hand. 45 minutes. That is all I am asking. So he went. He arrived at 9, an hour after the event began, wearing a dark navy suit and the armor of his indifference. His driver dropped him at the entrance. His security detail, a single discreet bodyguard named Cole, followed at a respectful distance. Victor moved through the crowd the way he always did, efficiently. He shook hands with the foundation's director. He exchanged brief words with a senator who was pretending to care about literacy rates while clearly scanning the room for more useful connections. He accepted a glass of sparkling water he had no intention of drinking. His plan was simple. 45 minutes. Write the check. Disappear into the night. Let the photographers get their shot and be done with it. He was standing near the far edge of the room, positioned in a corner where the lighting was dim enough to soften the stares, when he heard her voice. It was not loud. It was not trying to carry across the room or command attention, but it was clear, distinct, like the sound of a single bell struck once in a very quiet cathedral, the kind of voice that did not need volume to be heard because it carried something rarer than volume. It carried truth. No, you have to hold it like this. See? Let the charcoal do the work. Your hand is just the guide. Victor turned. Near the opposite wall, beneath a large display of children's artwork from the Foundation's after-school programs, a woman was crouched on the floor beside a young girl of about 8. They were both drawing on a large sheet of paper that had been spread across the concrete, and the woman was demonstrating something with a piece of charcoal, her fingers dark with it, her movements fluid and patient. The little girl was watching with the kind of fierce concentration that children reserve for things they desperately want to learn. And the woman, she was smiling. Not a performance smile. Not the kind of smile people wear at charity events when they know cameras might be pointed in their direction. This was the real thing. Wide and unguarded and completely unself-conscious. She was striking. Deep brown skin that caught the warm light of the Edison bulbs and held it like amber holds sunlight. High cheekbones that gave her face an architectural elegance. Hair cropped short and natural, framing her head like a crown she had not asked for, but wore effortlessly. She had on a burgundy wrap dress, simple, not designer, and flat shoes, practical for someone who clearly had no intention of standing still and looking decorative all evening. There was paint beneath her fingernails. The little girl said something Victor could not hear, and the woman laughed. A full, unrestrained, open-mouthed laugh that cut through the polite murmur of the room like a ray of sunlight breaking through fog. Several people nearby turned to look. The woman did not notice, or if she did not care. Victor could not look away, and it was not her beauty that held him, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was something else, something he had not seen in so long that it took him a moment to identify it. Presence. In a room full of people performing, posturing, positioning themselves for maximum visibility and strategic advantage, this woman was simply there, fully engaged, completely absorbed. She was sitting on a concrete floor with charcoal on her hands, drawing with a child, and the rest of the world could wait. Victor watched for longer than he intended. He watched her high-five the little girl when the drawing was finished. He watched her stand and stretch her back, scanning the room with warm, curious eyes. He watched her straighten the display of children's art with careful hands, adjusting a piece that had come loose from its tape, treating it with the same respect one might give a painting in a museum. And then he forced himself to look away, because staring was something other people did to him, and he refused to become that. He returned to his corner, checked his watch. 20 minutes had passed. He had 25 left on his self-imposed sentence. He could make it. But fate, or perhaps the architecture of the evening, had other plans. 15 minutes later, the woman appeared at the refreshment table directly beside him. She reached for a glass of water, and he noticed her fingers again, still bearing traces of charcoal, black dust in the creases of her knuckles, a smudge across her left thumb. "You have got," he started, and then stopped himself. He was not sure why he was speaking at all. He had not initiated a conversation with a stranger at an event like this in years. She looked at him, and this is the moment. This is the moment he had lived 1,000 times with 1,000 different faces. The quick assessment, the flicker of shock, the careful rearrangement of features into something that resembled normalcy, the pity or the revulsion, quickly masked, followed by the overcompensating friendliness that was somehow worse than either. None of it came. She looked at him the way one might look at a painting in a gallery, with attention, with genuine curiosity, with no rush to form a verdict. Her eyes moved across his face, yes, including the scars, but they did not linger there. They did not dart away. They simply took him in, all of him, as though the scars were no more or less noteworthy than the color of his eyes or the set of his jaw. "Charcoal," she said, glancing down at her hands with a rueful smile. "Occupational hazard. I teach art to kids in the Foundation's after-school program. They always manage to talk me into drawing with them." Her voice was warm, unhurried, the kind of voice that suggested she had nowhere else she would rather be, and no one else she would rather be talking to. "That is who you are here tonight. A teacher. Among other things, I am also an artist, painter mostly. But tonight, I am just Nadira." She extended her hand toward him. Then she paused, looking at the charcoal smudges, and laughed softly. "Actually, maybe do not shake that." Victor reached out and took her hand anyway. Her fingers were warm. Her grip was solid, not delicate, not tentative, the handshake of someone who was entirely comfortable in her own skin. "Victor," he said. "I know who you are," she replied. His stomach tightened. Here it comes, he thought. The shift, the recalculation, the moment she factors in the net worth and decides what version of herself to present. "You funded the reading program at the Brownsville Community Center," she said. "My students go there. 3 of them learned to read this year because of that program." He blinked. Of all the things people knew about him, the buildings, the satellites, the Forbes covers, the net worth that financial journalists like to update quarterly as though it were a sports score, she knew about a reading program, one he had funded almost as an afterthought, buried in a long list of charitable allocations that his foundation manager had presented to him in a quarterly report. "It is a good program," he managed. "It changed lives," she corrected him gently. "There is a difference." The words landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. They talked for an hour. He forgot about his 45-minute exit plan. He forgot about Cole standing by the door. He forgot about the careful calculations he usually ran during conversations, the constant assessment of motives and angles and exit strategies. Nadira told him about her work, teaching art in underfunded schools across Brooklyn and the Bronx. The daily battle for supplies, for space, for the basic recognition that art was not a luxury but a necessity. She talked about her students the way other people talked about miracles, with awe and gratitude and a fierce protective pride that made her eyes flash. She told him about her own painting. Abstract work, mostly. Landscapes of emotion rather than geography. She showed occasionally at small galleries that smelled like turpentine and ambition, she said with a grin. She spoke about color theory the way other people spoke about religion, with reverence and conviction, and the unmistakable passion of someone who had found the thing they were put on earth to do. And she asked him questions. Not the questions he was used to. Not questions about market share or acquisition strategies or his opinion on the future of artificial intelligence. She asked him what the last book he had read was. She asked if he had ever tried painting. She asked him if the sparkling water was any good. "It is terrible," he said. She laughed. "Then order something else." He could not remember the last time someone had spoken to him with such uncomplicated directness. No agenda, no calculation, no careful positioning. Just two people talking the way people are supposed to talk. When the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, Nadira gathered her things with the same easy efficiency she brought to everything else. She slung her bag over her shoulder and turned to him with a smile. "It was really nice meeting you, Victor. Truly." She meant it. He could tell because she did not linger. She did not angle for a business card or a follow-up meeting or an invitation to something more prestigious. She did not try to extend the conversation past its natural endpoint or manufacture a reason to exchange phone numbers. She simply smiled, tucked a stray charcoal pencil behind her ear, and walked away into the Brooklyn night. Victor stood there for a long time after she left. The event space emptied around him. The waiters began clearing tables. The jazz trio packed up their instruments. Cole appeared at his elbow with a quiet "Sir, the car is ready." Victor nodded, but he did not move. Not right away. Something had happened in that hour. Something he could not name and was not sure he wanted to. A door he had sealed shut years ago had cracked open, just a sliver, just enough to let in a thin beam of light. And the light was warm. And it terrified him, because Victor Ashford knew from experience that light was just another word for something that could burn. He spent the next week in a state of distraction so profound that his executive assistant Margaret, a woman who had worked for him for 12 years and had weathered every storm his personality could produce, actually asked if he was feeling well. Margaret was 53, sharp as a surgical instrument, and entirely unintimidated by his reputation. She was one of perhaps 4 people on the planet who spoke to Victor Ashford without filtering their words through layers of deference and fear. "You seem distracted," she observed on Thursday morning, placing his schedule on the desk in front of him. She said it the way a doctor might note an unusual symptom, clinical, but not without concern. "I am thinking," he replied without looking up. "You are always thinking. This is different." She paused. "This is brooding." He did not respond. She was not wrong. For 7 days, Victor had been replaying the conversation in his head. Not obsessively, not in the lovesick, daydreaming way that the word replaying might suggest. It was more like he was studying it, turning it over, examining it from different angles the way he might examine a complex acquisition or an unusual market trend, trying to figure out what was different. Because something was different, he had attended hundreds of events, had thousands of conversations, had met countless people who smiled at him and shook his hand and said things they thought he wanted to hear. And none of them, not one, had left this kind of residue. Nadira had not been impressed by him. That was part of it. She had not been intimidated or awed or calculating. She had simply been present, engaged, honest, and she had not flinched. He kept coming back to that. The way she had looked at his face, the complete and utter absence of the reaction he had come to expect from every new person he met. No shock, no pity, no forced casualness designed to signal I am fine with this, even though I am clearly not. She had just looked at him, as though his scars were as unremarkable as the color of the walls. He wanted to see her again. The thought arrived uninvited and settled in like a guest who had no intention of leaving. He argued with it, reasoned with it, reminded himself of every time he had allowed hope to take root only to watch it wither. It did not matter. The thought remained. On Friday morning, he made his decision. He would arrange a donor visit to the after-school art program. Official capacity, perfectly reasonable. A major funder taking an interest in how his money was being spent. No one could question it. Margaret raised an eyebrow when he told her to schedule it. An after-school art program, she repeated. The one at the community center. Part of the literacy initiative. The one you fund through a foundation allocation you have never once personally visited in 12 years. He looked at her. She looked back. Something passed between them. An acknowledgement of what was actually happening. Unspoken but perfectly understood. I will set it up for Tuesday, she said, and left his office without another word. The community center was in a part of Brooklyn that Victor's driver had to GPS. The building was squat and functional. Beige brick, metal doors. A mural on one side that was fading but still vibrant enough to suggest that someone had once cared deeply about this place. Someone still did. Victor arrived in a dark suit that was entirely wrong for the setting. He realized this the moment he walked through the front doors and saw the linoleum floors, the fluorescent lights, the hand-painted signs directing visitors to the gym, the food pantry, the tutoring rooms. This was not his world. This was a world that operated on passion and duct tape, and the stubborn refusal to give up on kids that the rest of the city had written off. He followed a volunteer down a narrow hallway to the basement. The art classroom was a revelation. The room itself was nothing special. Low ceiling, industrial carpet that had seen better decades. Folding tables arranged in a rough semicircle. But the walls were extraordinary. Every inch was covered in student artwork. Paintings and drawings and collages and mixed media pieces that exploded with color and energy, and the fearless creativity that children possess before the world teaches them to doubt themselves. And at the front of the room, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a smudge of blue paint on her jawline that she clearly did not know about. Nadira was demonstrating watercolor technique to a group of 12 children who watched her with the kind of rapt attention that most university professors would envy. You see how the water carries the pigment, she was saying, her brush moving in slow, deliberate strokes across a large sheet of paper clipped to an easel. You do not force it. You guide it. The water knows where to go. You just have to trust it. A boy in the front row raised his hand. What if it goes somewhere you did not want it to go? Then you work with it, Nadira replied with a smile. Sometimes the best paintings come from happy accidents. She looked up and saw Victor standing in the doorway. Surprise flickered across her face. Brief and genuine, then the warmth. Mr. Ashford, she said, checking on your investment. Something like that, he replied. What happened next was not what he had expected. He had anticipated a tour, a polite walkthrough, perhaps a brief conversation with a few students before he made his exit. Instead, Nadira put him to work. Before he fully understood what was happening, Victor Ashford, billionaire, telecommunications titan, the Phantom of Manhattan, was sitting at a folding table in a tiny plastic chair that was approximately 4 sizes too small for him, a paintbrush in his hand, a cup of muddy water beside him, and a 9-year-old boy named Marcus sitting next to him, watching his every stroke with the unsparing eye of a seasoned critic. You are pressing too hard, Marcus informed him. His voice carried the absolute certainty that only 9-year-olds possess. Victor looked down at his painting. It was supposed to be a tree. It looked like a green explosion. Miss Nadira says you have to let the brush breathe, Marcus continued. You are choking it. The brush needs to breathe, Victor repeated. Yeah, Marcus nodded solemnly. Like people. Victor looked across the room. Nadira was watching the exchange from 3 tables away. Their eyes met, and she smiled. Not the careful, controlled smiles he was used to from the world outside these walls. A real smile, the kind that starts in the eyes and works its way down. And something shifted, something quiet and tectonic, like the first tremor before the ground reshapes itself forever. He came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. If this story is making you feel something, if you've ever watched someone slowly start to open their heart after years of keeping it locked away, I want you to drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever met someone who made you want to be brave again? I read every single comment, and your story might just inspire someone else watching right now. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story from Mr. Andy Love Stories. Now let us continue, because this story is just getting started. The relationship between Victor and Nadira did not unfold the way relationships do in movies. There was no sudden declaration of feelings, no dramatic moment where music swelled and two people ran toward each other in slow motion. It grew the way real things grow, slowly, quietly, one small moment at a time. It started with coffee. After his third visit to the art program, Nadira suggested they grab a cup at a Dominican spot around the corner from the community center. She said she needed caffeine after 3 hours of preventing 12 children from painting each other instead of their canvases, and Victor, who had never in his life set foot in a Dominican coffee shop, found himself saying yes before the word had fully formed in his mind. The cafe was tiny. 5 tables, a counter with a glass case full of pastries, and a woman behind the register who greeted Nadira by name and immediately asked who her friend was. "This is Victor," Nadira said. "He is learning to paint." The woman behind the counter looked at Victor, looked at his suit, looked at his scars, looked back at his suit. "You want café con leche?" It was not a question. She was already making it. They sat at a table by the window and talked for 2 hours, about the children in the program, about the bureaucratic nightmares of arts funding, about Nadira's belief that creativity was not a luxury reserved for the privileged, but a fundamental human need, as essential as food and shelter and the feeling of being seen. Victor listened. He was good at listening when the speaker was saying something worth hearing. And Nadira was. Every sentence she spoke had weight and intention. She did not fill silence with noise. She did not perform enthusiasm or manufacture opinions she thought he wanted to hear. She was simply, thoroughly, unapologetically herself. And she asked him questions again, not about business, not about money. She asked him what kind of music he listened to when he was alone. She asked him if he cooked. She asked him what he was afraid of. He answered the first 2 honestly. Classic jazz. No. The third question he deflected. She noticed. She let it go. Coffee after the art program became a weekly ritual. Then it expanded beyond Tuesdays. A Saturday afternoon walk through Prospect Park, where Nadira pointed out how the light fell differently through each species of tree, how the shadows of oak leaves were rounder and softer than the sharp geometric patterns cast by maples. She told him that learning to see was the first and most important lesson she taught her students. "You would be amazed," she said, "at how many people go through their entire lives without really seeing anything. They look, sure, but seeing is different. Seeing requires you to slow down and actually pay attention." Victor thought about this for a long time afterward. He thought about how he had built his career on observation, on reading rooms and markets and human behavior. And yet somehow, somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing the world itself, the actual physical world, the trees, the light, the way rain looked on pavement. He had been so busy reading people's motives that he had forgotten to notice their beauty. One afternoon in late November, Nadira invited him to her studio. It was above a laundromat in Bed-Stuy. You reached it by climbing a narrow metal staircase on the outside of the building, the kind that rattled with every step and made you acutely aware of your own mortality. The door at the top was painted red and slightly warped from years of humidity rising from the dryers below. Inside was a different universe. The studio was small, maybe 400 square feet, but it was alive in a way that Victor's penthouse, with its 4,000 square feet of polished marble and designer furniture, had never been. Canvases were everywhere, leaning against walls, stacked on shelves, propped on easels in various stages of completion. The floor was splattered with paint in 100 colors, a Jackson Pollock in its own right. There were jars of brushes on every surface, tubes of paint organized by hue, rags stained with the ghosts of past projects. The smell was turpentine and linseed oil, and something earthy and alive. Bookshelves lined one wall, overflowing with art books, poetry collections, and dog-eared novels with cracked spines. A small kitchen area in the corner had a hot plate and a kettle, and exactly 2 mugs, both chipped, both clearly loved. And on the far wall, hanging in the place of honor where the light from the single large window hit it at exactly the right angle, was the painting. It was large, 4 feet by 3 feet, abstract but somehow also unmistakably a landscape. The bottom half was deep indigo, the color of a night sky at its darkest, layered and textured with brushstrokes that suggested devastation, loss, the aftermath of something catastrophic. but the upper half was gold, burning, radiant, impossible gold that seemed to pulse with its own light, rising out of the darkness below like a sunrise emerging from the wreckage of the world. Victor stood in front of it for a long time. "What is this one called?" he asked. "After the fire," Nadira said quietly. She had come to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of the oil paint on her skin. Something in his chest constricted. "I painted it after my mother's house burned down when I was 14, she continued. Her voice was steady but soft. "We lost everything. Photographs, furniture, my grandmother's quilt that she had made by hand over the course of 2 years. All of it. Gone." She paused. "But the sky that night, after the fire trucks left and the smoke cleared, and my family was standing on the sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on our backs, the sky was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I have been trying to paint it ever since." Victor turned to look at her. She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw something that made the breath catch in his throat. Recognition. Not the kind of recognition that comes from knowing someone's name or their face or their net worth. Something deeper. The recognition of shared experience, of parallel scars, of two people who had both been marked by fire and had both, in their own ways, spent their lives trying to find the beauty that comes after. "Scars are not always visible," Nadira said, "but they do not make us less beautiful. Sometimes they make us the only people in the room who truly understand what matters." The words landed in Victor like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples through every carefully constructed defense he had built. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Her fingers were warm and paint-stained, and they curled around his with a certainty that made something inside him tremble. They stood like that for a long time, not speaking, not needing to, the painting glowing on the wall before them, the sound of dryers humming through the floor beneath their feet, the late afternoon light shifting slowly from gold to amber to rose. He did not kiss her that day. He wanted to. The wanting was so acute it was almost physical, a pulling sensation in his chest that he had not felt in so long he had forgotten the word for it. But he did not, because this felt too important to rush, too fragile to risk breaking with a premature gesture. Whatever this was, it deserved patience. It deserved the kind of care that Nadira brought to everything she touched. That evening, back in his penthouse, the silence felt different. It was no longer the oppressive, suffocating silence of isolation. It was the quiet hum of anticipation, of something beginning. He poured himself a cup of tea. He never drank tea. He had bought the kettle and the tea bags 3 days earlier without fully admitting to himself why. He sat by the window with the mug warming his hands and looked out at the city he had conquered but never called home. And for the first time in 25 years, he smiled. Not the controlled, performative smile he deployed in boardrooms and at benefits. A real smile, small and private and entirely for himself. His staff noticed the change before he did. Margaret was the first to say something. "You have been in a good mood lately," she remarked one morning as he strode into the office carrying, of all things, a coffee from the Dominican place in Brooklyn. "Business is good," he replied. "Business is always good," she said. "This is something else." She looked at him with the unblinking directness that made her invaluable. Victor returned the look, but said nothing. Margaret did not press. She did not need to. She had worked for him long enough to know that something fundamental had shifted, and she was wise enough to let it unfold in its own time. Others noticed too. His COO commented that Victor had been less combative in board meetings. His driver noted that he no longer sat in the back seat with his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on some middle distance. A junior analyst who had previously been terrified of Victor told a colleague that Ashford had actually asked her how her weekend was and appeared to genuinely listen to the answer. And then there was the night of the almost kiss. It was a Thursday, late. They had spent the evening in Nadira's apartment, not the studio, but the apartment itself, a small one-bedroom in the same building, warm and full of the things that made a space feel lived in. Framed photographs, books stacked everywhere, plants in every corner, some thriving, some struggling, all clearly loved. The faint scent of cinnamon from the candles she always burned. They had eaten takeout from a Thai place down the street and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her father, a jazz musician who had died when she was 20, leaving behind nothing but a trumpet, a pile of unpaid bills, and a daughter who inherited his belief that art was the only honest language in a dishonest world. Victor told her about Marin, about the fire, about the months in the hospital. He told her things he had not told anyone in decades, and the words came out not in the careful, measured sentences he used in business, but in halting, rough fragments, like stones being pried loose from a wall. She listened the way she did everything, fully, without interruption, without the urge to fix or advise or compare. When he finished, she did not say, "I am sorry." She did not say, "How terrible." She said, "Thank you for trusting me with that." And somehow that was exactly right. They were sitting on her couch. The candle had burned low. Rain was tapping against the window in a soft, irregular rhythm. She was close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. And when their eyes met, the air between them changed, became dense with something unspoken, electric. He looked at her mouth. She looked at his. The moment stretched like a held breath. He almost leaned in. Every nerve in his body was telling him to close the distance. But the old voice, the voice that had kept him safe and kept him alone for so many years, whispered its familiar caution. And he stopped. He finished his tea. He thanked her. He stood. She walked him to the door and said goodnight, and when he stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of her voice followed him like a song he could not get out of his head. In the car going home, he pressed his forehead against the cold window glass and closed his eyes. He was falling, and for the first time in his adult life, he was not sure he wanted to stop. The photograph hit the tabloids on a Tuesday morning. It was not a particularly intimate image, just Victor and Nadira standing together outside a gallery opening in Chelsea, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as they spoke, her head tilted slightly toward him, caught mid-laugh. Two people in a crowd, sharing a private moment in public. But the headline was a blade. Phantom's new project, billionaire Victor Ashford and his latest charity case. The article was 1,200 words of surgical cruelty disguised as journalism. They dissected Nadira's life with the cold precision of an autopsy. Her income as a freelance artist and part-time teacher, her apartment in Bed-Stuy, her lack of social media presence, framed not as the privacy preference of a woman who valued her inner life over digital performance, but as evidence of obscurity, of irrelevance. They called her a struggling artist. They put the words in italics as though they carried a particular sting. They speculated about her motives with the kind of insinuating language that never quite crosses the line into libel, but does its damage just the same. Strategic romance, calculated proximity, a woman playing the long game. They even found photographs from a student exhibition she had organized at the community center and captioned them with the sneering implication that this was the extent of her professional achievement, as though teaching children to see the world through art was something to be mocked. And then there were the comments about Victor, the inevitable references to his scars, the tired narrative of the damaged billionaire so desperate for companionship that he had been ensnared by a clever woman from a different world, Beauty and the Beast. They did not say it directly. They did not need to. Every word was arranged to lead the reader to that exact conclusion. Nadira read the article once. She was sitting at her kitchen table, coffee going cold beside her laptop, morning light coming through the window, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. She read it once, and then she closed the laptop. She did not cry. She did not throw anything. She sat very still for a long time, her hands flat on the table, her breathing deliberately slow and even. It was not the article itself that hurt. She had dealt with judgment before. As a black woman in the art world, she had spent her entire career being underestimated, dismissed, reduced to a demographic category rather than seen as an individual. She had walked into gallery openings where the security guard assumed she was catering staff. She had submitted work to juried exhibitions and been told, by people who had never seen her paintings, that her perspective might be too narrow for their audience. She had built a thick skin through years of necessity, but this was different. This was not about her career or her art. This was about Victor, about what this kind of exposure might do to the man she had watched slowly, carefully, courageously begin to open up. She knew how fiercely private he was. She had seen the way he braced himself before entering public spaces, the micro-adjustments he made to his posture and his expression, the armor he put on like a second skin every time he stepped outside his door. She feared, with a cold certainty that settled in her stomach like a stone, that this headline would do what nothing else had managed. It would drive him back behind his walls. It would undo every small brave thing he had done in the months since they had met. It would confirm every terrible thing the world had ever whispered to him about what happened when you let people close. Her phone stayed quiet all day. No calls, no texts. She waited. and the silence told her everything she needed to know. Victor saw the article before Nadira did. It had been forwarded to him by 3 different people before he had finished his morning coffee. His publicist, Diane, a board member named Harlan, who had the emotional sensitivity of a concrete slab, and an old acquaintance from his university days who sent it with a single line. "Thought you should see this." Victor did not click the link right away. He did not need to. He had seen versions of this before. He knew the formula. He knew the specific cocktail of voyeurism and cruelty that tabloid journalism specialized in. The way they could take something private and beautiful and render it grotesque simply by holding it up to the wrong light. But he had never seen it done to someone he cared about. When he finally opened the article, reading it on his phone in the back seat of his car while Cole navigated morning traffic, something in his chest twisted with a violence that startled him. It was not the insults directed at him. He had been called worse. He had been called everything. The scar-faced billionaire, the monster of Manhattan, the man no woman could love without closing her eyes. He had absorbed these words for 25 years, and they had formed a kind of calcified layer around his heart, a shell that could withstand almost anything. But they had dragged her into it. They had taken Nadira, a woman whose only crime was treating him like a human being, and reduced her to a punchline, a gold digger, a charity case, a strategic climber who had identified a wealthy target and was making her move. The thought that she might be hurt, mocked, or diminished because of her proximity to him was unbearable. It was the thing he had feared from the very beginning, the thing that had kept him alone for all those years. The knowledge that his world was toxic, that the spotlight that followed him was not warm but scorching, and that anyone who stood too close would inevitably be burned. So he did what he had always done when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. He withdrew. He told himself it was the right thing. He told himself he was protecting her. He told himself that the kindest thing he could do for Nadira was to remove himself from her life before the media did more damage. Before the headlines escalated. Before the scrutiny that came with being associated with Victor Ashford consumed her entirely. He stopped calling. He stopped texting. He canceled a Tuesday visit to the art program through Margaret, citing a scheduling conflict. He did not explain. He did not say goodbye. He simply vanished, like the phantom they had always called him. 2 days passed, then 5, then a week, and the absence was worse than anything. It was worse than the article, worse than the headlines, worse than the 25 years of solitude that had preceded Nadira's arrival in his life. Because before Nadira, he had not known what he was missing. The loneliness had been a constant, like a low-grade fever you stop noticing because it has been with you so long. But now he knew. Now he had felt the warmth of her studio, the steadiness of her gaze, the way she held a conversation like she was cradling something precious, the way she laughed, the way she said his name, and the knowing made the absence excruciating. He buried himself in work. He took meetings at 6 in the morning and did not leave his office until midnight. He reviewed contracts with a ferocity that unnerved his legal team. He launched an acquisition bid for a European satellite company that his advisors had told him was premature, and he drove the negotiation with such relentless intensity that the opposing team agreed to terms in 4 days instead of the projected 4 weeks. None of it helped. None of it filled the space she had left. On the 4th day of silence, Nadira sent him a single text message. "I am not going anywhere, but I will not wait forever for you to stop being afraid." He read it 17 times. He typed and deleted 12 different responses. He put his phone down. He picked it up. He put it down again. He did not reply. The days dragged on. 2 weeks now. 2 weeks of silence that roared louder than any sound. His penthouse, always cold, felt arctic. The art on his walls, always impersonal, now seemed to mock him with its emptiness. These paintings, bought for 6- and 7-figure sums from dealers who told him they were masterpieces, had none of the raw, visceral power of a single canvas called After the Fire, painted by a woman in a studio above a laundromat. One night, alone in his kitchen at 2 in the morning, he poured himself a glass of scotch and stared into it without drinking. His reflection stared back from the amber surface, distorted and warped. And in the silence, he had the kind of realization that only comes when you have exhausted every lie you have been telling yourself. He was not avoiding Nadira for her sake. He was avoiding her for his own, because wanting her meant risking something he had not risked in 25 years. It meant being seen, truly, fully, without armor or pretense. It meant being known by another person, not as Victor Ashford the billionaire, not as the phantom, not as the man with the scars, but as the man beneath all of that, the man who was terrified and lonely and desperately, achingly hungry for the kind of love he had convinced himself he did not deserve. And the thought of losing that, of opening himself completely and being rejected for who he actually was, not for his face or his money or his reputation, but for the essence of him, the real Victor, the one he had kept locked away for so long that he was not even sure he still existed. That was the fear. That was the wall. Not the media, not the headlines, not the world's judgment. The fear that if someone truly saw him, all of him, they might confirm what he had always secretly believed, that there was nothing worth loving underneath. He set the scotch down untouched. He put his head in his hands. And for the first time in 25 years, Victor Ashford wept. The tears came hard and without warning, shaking through his chest in waves. Not for the article, not for the scars, not for Celeste or Tessa or the parade of people who had used him and left, but for the years, for the 25 years of self-imposed exile, for the thousands of nights in that penthouse with the lights of Manhattan spread beneath him like a kingdom he ruled but could not inhabit, for the boy he had been before the fire, for the man he might have become, for the life he might have lived if he had not been so goddamn afraid. And when the tears finally stopped, when the silence of the penthouse settled around him again, a different voice spoke, not the old voice of caution and withdrawal, a new voice, quiet but steady. She is still there. She told you she would be. Go. It was her birthday when he finally decided. He did not send flowers through a courier. He did not call ahead. He did not ask Margaret to arrange anything or instruct his driver to plot the most efficient route. He simply stood up from his desk at 4 p.m. on a rainy Friday, picked up his coat, walked past Margaret without a word, and got into his car. He drove himself. No driver, no pretense. Through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, across the bridge, into Brooklyn, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, past the brownstones and the bodegas and the community center where he had sat in a tiny chair and let a 9-year-old boy teach him to breathe. He parked on her street. He climbed the stairs to her apartment. The rain was coming down hard, soaking through his coat, running down his face, pooling in the ridges of his scars. He knocked. Silence, then footsteps, then the sound of a lock turning. She opened the door. She was wearing an oversized sweater and leggings. No shoes. Her hair was slightly damp as though she had recently showered. There was a book in her left hand, her thumb marking her place. Behind her, the apartment glowed with the warm light of the cinnamon candle, and something was playing softly on a speaker, a jazz trumpet. Her father's kind of music. She looked at him, the rain on his face, the coat soaked through, the expression in his eyes that was nothing like the controlled, distant, armored look the world had come to associate with Victor Ashford. This was a man undone, a man standing at the edge of something, having finally found the courage to jump. Alexander, no, Victor, she said softly, and then more quietly, what are you doing here? He took a breath. His voice was low but steady, and the words came out with the careful precision of someone who has rehearsed them 1,000 times and is now speaking them for the first time. I owe you an apology. She stepped aside to let him in, closed the door behind him. The warmth of her apartment wrapped around him like a blanket. She turned to face him. Her expression was not angry. It was something more complex than anger. Hurt, yes. Disappointment, yes. But beneath that, something patient, something that had been waiting. You have been gone for 2 weeks, she said. No calls, no explanation, nothing. I thought I was protecting you, he admitted. From the media, from my world, from the attention that comes with being near me. Her brow furrowed. You thought disappearing would protect me. I did not know what else to do. He ran a hand through his damp hair. I have spent years keeping people at a distance because it is easier than letting them close. Easier than finding out they never wanted me. Just what I could give them. Nadira's gaze softened, but she did not move toward him. She stood her ground, arms at her sides, giving him the space to say what he had come to say. Not making it easy. Not making it hard. Just present. And you think I am like that, she said. Not a question. Not an accusation. A prompt. An invitation to be honest. No. His voice was fierce now, raw in a way she had never heard. That is the problem. You are the first person who has made me feel human in decades, Nadira. You looked at me and you did not see the scars or the money or the headlines. You saw me, and it terrified me, because if I let myself believe it, if I let myself believe that someone could actually love me for who I am, and then I lost you, I do not know if I could go back to the way things were before. I do not know if I could survive that emptiness again, knowing what it felt like to not be empty. The silence that followed was thick with everything unspoken. The rain against the windows, the soft, distant trumpet, the candle flickering. Nadira looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the space between them, slowly, deliberately, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to, giving him the choice. He did not pull away. She stopped in front of him, close enough to touch. She raised her hands slowly, her charcoal-stained, paint-stained, beautiful, imperfect hands, and she placed them on his face. Both sides, the smooth left cheek and the scarred right cheek, held with equal pressure, equal tenderness, equal love. Victor, she said gently, you are not a building to be admired from a distance. You are not an empire. You are not a headline. You are a person, flawed and scared and stubborn and brilliant and so much more than you have ever allowed yourself to believe. And I did not fall in love with your satellites or your net worth or your penthouse with its cold, beautiful views. I fell in love with the man who sat in a tiny plastic chair and let a 9-year-old boy critique his painting. I fell in love with the man who stood in front of a painting called After the Fire and understood it without me having to explain. I fell in love with you, Victor, scars and all, inside and out, all of you. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. I just need to know, she continued, her voice steady, that you will not run every time you are scared. I am not asking you to be fearless. I am asking you to stay. I will stay, he said. His voice cracked on the second word, and he did not care. I will stay. God, Nadira, I will stay. And then she kissed him, soft at first, the lightest pressure, a question more than a statement. And when he answered, leaning into her, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer, the kiss deepened. Her fingers traced the ridges of his scars as though they were braille and she was reading the story of his life, and he felt something inside him crack open. Not break, not shatter. Crack open, the way earth cracks open in spring to let new things grow. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, foreheads touching, her thumbs still resting against the scarred skin of his cheek, he laughed. A small, broken, beautiful sound. Happy birthday, he whispered. She laughed too. Best gift I have ever gotten, she said. A soaking wet billionaire on my doorstep. He kissed her again, and this time neither of them pulled away for a very long time. If this moment right here is hitting you in the chest, if you have ever needed someone to look past your walls and love you anyway, I need you to share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. Sometimes the right story at the right time can change a life. Share it, send it to someone you love, and if you have not already, like this video and subscribe to Mr. Andy Love Stories. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Spring arrived, and with it a quieter kind of revolution. The change in Victor was not dramatic. It was not the kind of overnight transformation that makes for good cinema, but bears no resemblance to actual human experience. It was gradual, incremental, a thawing that happened 1 degree at a time. He started to laugh more. Not the controlled, measured sounds he had deployed in social situations like tools, but real laughter. The kind that surprised even him when it came out. Raw and unpolished and sometimes too loud. He started painting on weekends. Terrible paintings. Truly awful. He had no natural talent for it and no technique, and his trees still looked like green explosions, and his attempts at portraits looked like something from a police sketch gone horribly wrong. Nadira hung every single one on the wall of her studio with exaggerated pride, positioning them alongside her own work as though they belonged there. This is not encouraging, he told her, standing in front of a particularly disastrous attempt at a sunset that looked more like a nuclear test. It is not supposed to be encouraging, she replied. It is supposed to be honest. You made something. That is what matters. He started noticing things. The color of the sky at different times of day. The way light moved through his office windows in the late afternoon, casting long golden rectangles across the floor. The sound of rain, which had always been background noise, now carried a specificity and a beauty that he could not believe he had ignored for 44 years. He started cooking. Badly, at first. He burned rice so catastrophically that the smoke alarm in Nadira's apartment went off, and her elderly neighbor from downstairs knocked on the door to ask if someone was trying to commit arson. But he kept at it, and slowly, meal by meal, he learned. Because cooking for someone, he discovered, was an act of love that required no words and left no room for pretense. He entered her world, and she entered his. She came to galas and business dinners, but she did not shrink beside him. She did not play the role of the quiet, decorative companion that the social pages expected. She engaged. She challenged. She asked questions that made senators pause and CEOs shift uncomfortably in their seats. She spoke about arts education at a table full of hedge fund managers, and by the end of the evening, 3 of them had written checks. His colleagues stopped seeing her as a curiosity and started seeing her as a force. And Nadira brought Victor into her world with equal confidence. He met her friends. Artists and teachers and musicians and community organizers who cared nothing for his fortune but appreciated his dry wit and the quiet way he listened when someone was speaking. They teased him mercilessly about his painting. He took it with grace that surprised everyone, including himself. He expanded funding for Nadira's art programs, not because she asked. She never asked. But because he had sat in those classrooms. He had seen what happened when a child who had been told they were nothing picked up a paintbrush and created something beautiful. He had watched the transformation in their eyes, the moment they realized they had something to say and the tools to say it. Marcus, the 9-year-old who had taught him to let the brush breathe, was now 10 and working on a series of paintings about his neighborhood that were so vivid and full of life that Nadira had arranged for them to be displayed in the community center lobby. Victor attended the exhibition. He stood in front of Marcus's paintings and felt something he could not name. Pride, maybe, or hope, or the recognition that the world was full of small, extraordinary humans who just needed someone to hand them a brush and get out of the way. The media tried again. They always tried. A gossip site ran a story about their relationship with the barely concealed sneer that was the house style of such publications. But the narrative was shifting. A profile in a major magazine featured both of them, not as a spectacle but as a partnership. The headline read, "The Ashford Effect, When Power Meets Purpose." The article focused on their philanthropic work, on the expansion of arts programming in underserved communities, on Victor's transformation from reclusive billionaire to engaged public citizen. The comments section was full of people sharing their own stories, people who had been told they were not enough, people who had hidden behind walls of their own making, people who had found someone who made them brave. Victor read every single one, and in the quiet moments, the ones the cameras never saw and the articles never captured, something even more beautiful was unfolding. Morning coffee in her studio, the smell of turpentine mixing with the steam from their mugs. Evening walks through the city, her hand in his, the scarred one, always the scarred one, as though she were making a point she would never need to speak aloud. The way she rested her head on his shoulder when they watched old movies on her couch. The way he always made her tea before she asked. The way they could sit in complete silence for an hour and feel more connected than most people feel in a lifetime of conversation. He stopped turning the scarred side of his face away from cameras. He did not make a conscious decision about it. He simply stopped, because the voice that had told him to hide, the voice that had been his constant companion for 25 years, had grown quiet. Not silent. Perhaps it would never be fully silent, but quiet enough to be drowned out by something louder, by love. By the steady, unwavering, fiercely honest love of a woman who had never once looked at him and seen anything other than exactly who he was. On a warm evening in late May, Victor asked Nadira to meet him at the rooftop of his company's headquarters. The building was one he had designed himself. 60 stories of glass and steel, rising from the Manhattan skyline like an outstretched hand. He had built it as a monument to his own achievement, a gleaming tower that said to the world, "I am here. I matter. Look at what I have made." But standing on its rooftop now, watching the sun descend toward the horizon, he understood that the building had always been a substitute, a proxy for the thing he actually wanted, to be seen, to matter, to someone. And now he did. Nadira arrived at 7. She came up in the private elevator, and when the doors opened, she stopped. The rooftop had been transformed. Hundreds of candles in glass holders lined the edges of the space, their flames steady in the still evening air, casting the entire rooftop in a warm, flickering gold. and along temporary walls that had been erected specifically for this evening hung 12 paintings. Her paintings, borrowed quietly from her studio over the past week with the help of Marcus, who had proven to be an enthusiastic and surprisingly effective co-conspirator. The paintings glowed under carefully positioned lights, every one of them, including After the Fire, which hung in the center of the display, its deep indigo and burning gold catching the candlelight and seeming to pulse with life. And at the center of the rooftop, a small table set for two, white linen, wildflowers in a mason jar, 2 chipped mugs. Her mugs, the ones from her studio. Victor stood beside the table. He was wearing a simple dark suit. No tie. His hair was slightly disheveled from the breeze, and his hands, the hands that had closed billion-dollar deals and signed contracts that reshaped industries, were trembling. "Victor," she breathed, taking it all in. Her eyes were wide, moving from the candles to the paintings to the mugs and back to him. "What is this?" He walked toward her, took her hands in his, looked into her eyes with a steadiness that belied the earthquake happening inside his chest. "Nadira," he said, 18 months ago, I was a ghost. I lived in a penthouse above a city I had never bothered to see. I had money and power and satellites orbiting the earth, and not a single person I could call it to in the morning when the nightmares came. I had convinced myself that this was acceptable, that solitude was the same as safety, that if I never let anyone in, I could never be hurt again. He paused. The city hummed far below them. The candles flickered. And then you showed up with charcoal on your hands and paint under your fingernails, and you asked me if I had ever tried painting. And I did not know it at the time, but that was the moment my life changed. Not because of the question, but because of the way you asked it. Like you actually cared about the answer. Like I was someone worth being curious about. His voice thickened. You taught me that scars are not the end of a story. They are the place where the story gets honest. You taught me that being seen is not the same as being exposed. You taught me that love is not a transaction or a strategy or a risk to be managed. It is the only thing that makes any of this. He gestured at the skyline, the building, the empire he had built, mean anything at all. He reached into his pocket and took out a small box. He opened it. Inside was a ring. Not the ostentatious, look at how much I spent diamond that the world might have expected from a man of his wealth. It was an elegant band set with a single deep blue sapphire, the exact color of the lower half of After the Fire, the color of the darkness before the dawn, the color of the night sky after everything burns and you are left standing on the sidewalk with nothing but the knowledge that you survived. "Nadira," he said, "will you marry me?" She looked at the ring. She looked at the paintings on the walls. She looked at the chipped mugs on the table. And then she looked at him. Both sides of his face, the smooth and the scarred, held in her gaze with equal tenderness. "I would marry you 1,000 times, Victor Ashford," she whispered. He slid the ring onto her finger, and then she pulled him in and kissed him, and around them the candles burned, and the city sparkled, and somewhere far below the world kept spinning in its complicated, heartbreaking, beautiful way. And Victor laughed, full and unrestrained and without a single thought for who might be watching. The wedding was not what anyone expected. The society pages had been speculating for weeks. A billionaire's wedding. The guesses ranged from a chateau in the south of France to a private island in the Caribbean. Guest lists were imagined that included heads of state and Hollywood royalty and Fortune 500 CEOs. They were all wrong. Victor and Nadira were married in the community center in Brooklyn, where they had found each other again. The basement art classroom had been transformed, but not beyond recognition. The fluorescent lights had been replaced with strings of warm bulbs. The folding tables had been moved to the edges of the room and draped in white cloth. Wildflowers sat in mason jars at the end of each row of chairs. And the walls. The walls were still covered in student artwork, every piece exactly where the children had hung them, because Nadira had insisted. "This is where we began," she said. "This is where we should begin again." The guest list was intimate. Teachers from Nadira's schools, artists from her circle, community organizers and volunteers from the center, a handful of Victor's closest business associates, the ones who had proven themselves worthy of trust over decades. Margaret, who wore a purple dress and cried from the first note of music to the last. Victor's sister Marin sat in the front row. In her lap, a bouquet of white lilies. Tears streamed down her face from the moment Nadira appeared at the end of the aisle, and they did not stop for the rest of the evening. Marcus was the ring-bearer. He carried the rings on a small silk cushion with the solemnity and gravity of a Supreme Court justice performing his most sacred duty. He did not smile during the ceremony. He was taking his responsibilities too seriously for that. But when Victor knelt down afterward to thank him, Marcus threw his arms around the billionaire's neck and hugged him with the uncomplicated fierceness that only a 10-year-old can produce. Nadira walked toward him in a simple ivory gown. Not couture, not designer. A dress she had found in a vintage shop in the village that fit her perfectly and cost less than the appetizers at most of the galas Victor had attended. Her short hair was adorned with a single gold comb. Her bouquet was wildflowers. Her feet were bare. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When she reached him, he took her hands, and the last wall inside him crumbled. Not with violence, not with the explosive force of demolition, with the gentle, inevitable yielding of something that had served its purpose and was no longer needed. Like a cocoon falling away. Their vows were not scripted. They had agreed on this. No ghostwriters, no perfectly polished phrases, just the truth. Victor went first. I spent 25 years believing I was unlovable, he said. His voice was steady but thick with emotion. I built towers and empires and fortresses around myself because I was terrified that if I stopped building, I would have to face the emptiness at the center. And then you walked into my life with charcoal on your hands and you said something I will never forget. You said that scars do not make us less beautiful. They make us the only people in the room who understand what matters. Nadira, you are my room. You are my understanding. You are every color I stopped being able to see and the light that brought them back. I am yours, completely and without reservation, for the rest of my life. Nadira did not try to control her tears. They fell freely, and she let them. Victor, she said, you are the bravest person I have ever known. Not because you are fearless, because you are not. You are terrified of everything that matters, and you show up anyway. You showed up at my door in the rain. You showed up in a tiny plastic chair. You showed up for 12 children who had never had a billionaire ask them to teach him something. You showed up for me when every instinct you had was telling you to run. That is not just bravery. That is love. You are my safest place, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know you are home. The room was silent, except for the sound of Margaret blowing her nose into a handkerchief. Even Cole, the bodyguard, was blinking rapidly. They kissed, and the room erupted. Not in the polished applause of a society wedding, in cheers and whistles and stomping feet and the full-throated joy of people who genuinely cared about the two humans standing at the front of the room. The reception was held on the ground floor of the community center. A potluck. Nadira had insisted on that too. Her friends brought dishes from every corner of the world. Dominican rice and beans, Nigerian jollof rice, Italian pasta from a woman named Rosa who lived on the 3rd floor of Nadira's building and had never met a billionaire but had decided Victor was all right because he always held the door for her. Southern barbecue from one of Victor's board members who turned out to be a secret pitmaster. There was dancing, not the choreographed first dance of a society wedding, just music and movement and joy. Nadira's father's trumpet recordings played through the speakers, and she danced to her father's music with her new husband in a room full of the people who had built the real, actual, messy, beautiful texture of their lives. And Victor danced, badly, with enthusiasm, with joy, with the complete absence of self-consciousness that comes from finally being free. Months passed, seasons changed, the world kept turning. Victor and Nadira found a new apartment together. Not his penthouse, not her one bedroom, somewhere in between. A brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, with big windows and creaking floors, and a room they had designated as a joint studio, where her canvases leaned against his terrible paintings, and neither of them cared which was which. The apartment was warm, lived in, full of books and art and the smell of whatever Victor was learning to cook that week and the sound of jazz drifting from a speaker in the kitchen. There were photographs on every wall, not just Nadira's professional work. Snapshots, moments, Marcus at his exhibition, Marin holding her white lilies, Victor in his tiny plastic chair, paintbrush in hand, looking up at the camera with an expression of such genuine bewilderment that Nadira had framed it and put it beside their bed. Victor still ran his empire, still commanded boardrooms, still negotiated with the precision that had made him one of the most formidable businessmen on the planet. But something had shifted at the molecular level. He was present in a way he had never been before. He asked his employees about their families. He remembered birthdays. He approved a company-wide policy that gave every Ashford Global employee paid time off for volunteer work. He funded the construction of 3 new community arts centers in underserved neighborhoods across New York. Each one was named not after him, but after Nadira's father. She cried when she found out. He held her and said nothing, because nothing was what she needed. Then, on a quiet morning in early autumn, the morning light coming through the bedroom windows in long golden slants, the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen, Nadira took Victor's hand. She placed it on her stomach. He looked at her. "I think," she said, with a smile that started slow and then bloomed across her entire face like sunrise, "we are going to need a bigger apartment." For a moment he simply stared at her, the words arranging themselves in his mind, the meaning settling in, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her with the tenderness of a man who had been given something he had never dared to ask for. "You have given me everything, Nadira," he said, his voice thick. "Everything." She pulled back just enough to look at him. Both sides of his face, the smooth and the scarred, her hands rising to frame his jaw in that gesture that had become the signature of their love. The gesture that said, "I see all of you and I choose all of you." "We gave it to each other," she corrected him gently. And there, in the warm light of a Brooklyn morning, with new life growing between them and the sound of the city waking up outside their windows and the faint smell of the coffee he had learned to make exactly the way she liked it, Victor Ashford laughed. Full, unrestrained, free. The sound carried through the open window and dissolved into the morning air, indistinguishable from joy itself. The man the world had called a phantom had become the most present person in the room. The man whose scars had been the subject of tabloid cruelty and sidewalk stares had found a woman who held his damaged face in her paint-stained hands and called it beautiful. The man who had spent 25 years locked inside a fortress of his own making had finally, courageously, irreversibly opened the door. And on the other side, he found not the rejection he had feared, not the pain, not the cruelty, just love, honest and imperfect and braver than anything he had ever built. Now listen, before I let you go, I want to leave you with something. This story is not just about Victor. It is not just about Nadira. It is about you. It is about the walls you have built, the ones you tell yourself are protection but are really prisons. It is about the scars you carry, visible or invisible, and the lie the world tells you about them, that they make you less than, that they disqualify you, that they are something to hide. They are not. Your scars are your depth. They are your story. They are the proof that you have lived and survived and come out the other side. And the right person, the person who is meant for you, will not ask you to hide them. They will hold them, the way Nadira held Victor's face. Both sides, equal tenderness, equal love. Do not let fear make your decisions. The walls you build to protect yourself are the same walls that keep love out. And the loneliest place on earth is not a penthouse above a city. It is a heart that has forgotten it was made to be known. You are worthy of love, scars and all. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do 3 things for me. First, hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps this story reach someone who might be sitting alone right now, believing they are unlovable. Your single click could change someone's night. Second, share this video. Send it to a friend. Send it to someone who needs to hear that their scars do not disqualify them from being loved. You never know whose life a story like this might change. Third, subscribe to Mr. Andy Love Stories and turn on notifications. We tell stories that remind you what it means to be human. Stories about love and courage and the terrifying, beautiful act of letting someone see the real you. Leave a comment below and tell me what is the biggest lesson you took from Victor and Nadira's story. I read every single comment, and your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing that love is still the most powerful force in the world. And remember, you are not your scars. You are not your mistakes. You are not the worst thing anyone has ever said about you. You are worthy. You are enough. And somewhere out there, someone is waiting to hold your face in their hands and tell you that you are beautiful, exactly as you are. Until next time, this is Mr. Andy Love Stories. Take care of each other.